What's up, everybody? So apparently they found the lost harbor of Constantinople 60 meters down, 180 feet. Though I gotta say, this documentary was horrible and they didn't explain anything. They spent 30 minutes talking about the tunnel that's being built and then 5 minutes about what they actually found here. But on one side of the harbor, they found 30 some odd ships buried there. This is nowhere near 180 feet, but it is 40, 50 feet down, which is still a pretty good ways. But for once, they're finally admitting that it wasn't due to thousands of years of erosion around because the goats ate all the vegetation. They seriously use that in places. But you don't leave a fleet of ships around as a harbor slowly silts in.
Geologists find what seems to be a similar tsunami line in a stratigraphic layer dating to the 6th century. Could one of Constantinople's earthquakes have caused a subsequent tsunami wave, flooding the harbor? When archaeologists dig at the same depth, they find more clues. 5 animal skeletons that were unusually intact. Here, a camel, whose neck was twisted towards its tail and body. This must have occurred before the animal died and got cold. And here, a horse, found with its feed bag and bridle still attached. Their intact skeletons and the way they were found lead some scientists to conclude they were swept up in a massive tsunami wave.
So they are dating this back to the 536 AD event. And I'm going to try to do this where if you've never heard any of this before, then you can keep up here. According to the official dating in history, we had 2 almost identical events that absolutely decimated the population, 536 AD and then the 1300s. Some cities say that 15 out of 16 didn't make it. And you can find estimates of 50 million to 200 million people worldwide. They don't know, but they really like to act like they do. Also, the official version of events leaves out everything in those 2 lists there except for the plague. They just say that it was Yersinia pestis. So in 536 AD, they say it was Justinian's plague, and then in the 1300s, you had the Black D. 536 AD is kind of an agreed upon number for things that happened around that period. But here's the crazy thing about 536 AD is afterwards, the world fell into the Dark Ages. There was no technological advancements, no literature, no famous heroes, no nothing. You basically got a list of emperors for the Byzantine Empire and a list of popes. Also, no world superpower arose to replace the Roman Empire. They say power abhors a vacuum, which means if there's a space, somebody's going to fill it, but nah, didn't happen. So to me, it looks like either the 536 AD event was so bad it almost ended humanity, or it's the same event and the Church of Rome added a lot of extra time in there. And I know that Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire is the key to all that jiggery fakery there, but I don't know if I can explain it very well. So they say the Western Roman Empire fell in 476 AD, I think, again, an agreed upon number, but that Constantine had moved the capital of the Roman Empire to Constantinople, well, Byzantium at the time. They renamed it Constantinople in 330 AD, and that the Byzantine Empire, and more importantly, Christendom, thrived there for 1,000 years. That's like an incomprehensible long time. Then it finally fell to the Ottomans in 1453. This is a map of the split between the Western and Eastern Roman Empire in 395 AD, and you see that the split is right on the eastern side of Greece right here. And then this is a map of the East-West Schism within the Church of Rome in 1054 AD, 700 years later, and you see that right there on the east side of Greece, once again, is where the schism occurs. And what it looks to me like is since Constantinople fell to the Ottomans in 1453, after the fact, they just said, well, yeah, but it was Christian for 1,000 years. So I'm just going to throw a bunch of stuff at you here and we'll see what sticks. First off, they never called themselves the Byzantine Empire. They just considered themselves Romans. And we're talking all the way up until World War I. The last of the Ottoman Empire considered themselves the last of the Romans. But Hieronymus Wolff first coined the term in 1557. The whole term Byzantine is synonymous with something being overly complicated or secretive. And that's because there's a huge lack of information for a city that was supposed to be the jewel of the ancient world, well, middle-aged world, for 1,000 years. But go watch a documentary on the subject and you'll hear about Constantine, who moved the capital from Rome to Constantinople. And then you'll hear about Justinian the Great, who was emperor when 536 AD happened. Then it gets really quiet for the next 800 years. There's hardly any primary source material from this era. And when you do look into those sources, this is what happens. This is Anna Komnene, and her work constitutes the most important primary source of Byzantine history of the late 11th and 12th centuries, as well as of the early Crusades. So it's a little bit like Josephus, one dude that wrote the whole history of the Greys. In a statement on how she gathered her sources for the Alexiad, Anna wrote, "My material has been gathered from insignificant writings, absolutely devoid of literary pretensions, and from old soldiers who were serving in the army at the time that my father seized the Roman scepter. I based the truth of my history on them by examining their narratives and comparing them with what I had written." And what they told me with what I had often heard from my father in particular and from my uncles. From all these materials, the whole fabric of my history, my true history, has been woven. So she's saying it's what my dad and my uncles told me, and the old soldiers backed it up. But scholars have also noted that Anna used the imperial archives, which she didn't mention in there. So just trust me, bro, it's from official documents. But here's something really weird about this. The Alexiad was written in Attic Greek. So she is supposed to be writing this in the 11th, 12th century AD, only she's using a form of Attic Greek that was used between 500 to 300 BC. So this is a pre-Hellenistic dialect. And it eventually evolved into Koine Greek, which is the majority of our classical writings. So why is she writing in a style that went extinct allegedly 1,100 years before her time? Well, possibly because it was written by somebody that didn't understand philology, which we'll get to in a minute. But here's what they say about the Alexiad that was written in Attic Greek. Consequently, it exhibits a struggle for an Atticism characteristic of the period, whereby the resulting language is highly artificial. So it's so far off from the original Attic Greek that it's basically its own language. Peter Frankopan argues that the lapses in some of the chronology of events can in part be attributed to errors in or lack of source material for those events. Anna herself also addresses these lapses, explaining them as a result of memory loss and old age. But regardless of errors in chronology, her history meets the standards of her time. Trust me, bro. Okay, so now let's talk about known forgeries. This is the Donation of Constantine. The Donation of Constantine is a forged Roman imperial decree by which the 14th century emperor Constantine the Great supposedly transferred authority over Rome and the western part of the Roman Empire to the Popa. Composed probably in the 8th century, it was used especially in the 13th century in support of claims of political authority by the papacy. Okay, so Constantine lived way back here around 330 AD. But by the time we pop out the other side of all the catastrophes, then people think that the Church of Rome has legitimate authority to rule. During the Middle Ages and Dark Ages, when they just invented a bunch of time, the donation was widely accepted as authentic, although Holy Roman Emperor Otto III did possibly raise suspicions as to the document's authenticity due to its making a gift to the See of Rome. It was not until the mid-15th century, with the revival of classical scholarship and textual criticism, that humanists and eventually the papal bureaucracy began to realize that the document could not possibly be genuine. Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa declared it a forgery and spoke of it as an apocryphal work, meaning that people think it's true, but it's not. Later, the humanist and scholar Lorenzo Valla argued in his philological study of the text that the language used in the manuscript could not be dated to the 4th century. The language of the text suggests that the manuscript can most likely be dated to the 8th century. Now, philology is the study of ancient languages, and all languages have their evolution to them. You can read a newspaper from the 1920s, and they use the English language way different than we do today. But Valla understood the languages well enough that he said there's no way this could have been written in the time of Constantine, and he believed the forgery to be so obvious that he suspected that the church knew the document to be inauthentic as well. Valla further argued that the papal usurpation of temporal power had corrupted the church, caused the wars of Italy, and reinforced the overbearing, barbarous, tyrannical priestly domination. So, coming out this side of the catastrophes, the Church of Rome usurped all kinds of secular power based off this donation of Constantine. And it doesn't stop there. The False Decretals, you can just think the false decrees, also called the Decretals of Pseudo Isidore. The collection contains 1. The letters of the popes preceding the Council of Nicaea, 325 AD, from Clement I to Miltiades, all of which are forgeries. 2. A collection of the decrees of councils, most of which are genuine, though the forged donation of Constantine is included. So they're still trying to claim that some of these are legit, but it's surrounded by known forgeries. 3. A large collection of letters of the popes from Sylvester I in 335 to Gregory II in 731, among which there are more than 40 falsifications. So that's 400 years of church history there, and this has all just been made up. And we're just getting started with the convoluted explanation here. As a collection, the False Decretals seems to have been used first at the Council of Ceding in 853. They were known at the end of the 9th century in Italy, but had little influence there until the end of the 10th century. For the next few centuries, they were generally accepted by canonists, theologians, and councils as authentic. So I love how we just blow through centuries of time like anything stays constant for 100 years straight. It's kind of like the toga. I guess that didn't go out of style for 1,000 years. Beginning in the 12th century, their authenticity was doubted by some critics, but it wasn't until 500 years later in the 17th century that David Blondel clearly refuted their defenders. Since that time, researchers has concentrated on the origin, extent, and purpose of the falsification. Well, I got a guess on the purpose of the falsification is to add a bunch of time on there so that they can claim Christianity has been around for 1,000 years longer than it actually has. Because, well, how can you question the authority of someone who's been in charge for 1,000 years? But in Constantinople, this is basically what they've got to say about that time period. You got Justinian the Great around the 536 AD event that's basically responsible for all of the Christian churches and public works that are to be found there. Then between 6 and 700 AD, a couple sieges by the Arabs. Then all quiet on the Eastern Front for 500 years from 700 to 1200 AD. Then it went back and forth between Christian and Arab rule for a couple hundred years. Then the fall of Constantinople in 1453. And I think that's what makes all of this phantom time possible. Since Constantinople fell to the Arabs, then they just say, well, yeah, but we were there for 1,000 years before that, trust me. While the entire Christian world was in the Dark Ages, this was the Islamic Golden Age. You've probably heard how Western Christendom regained all of its knowledge of the past from Islam. But the way I look at this timeline is prior to the 1300s catastrophe was the Golden Age of Islam in the East. And in the West, if you take out the 800 years of phantom time in there in the Dark Ages, well, then you would just have the height of the Roman Empire running concurrent with the height of the Islamic Golden Age, and it was basically a high point of civilization everywhere for 800 years, and then the collapse. Today in Constantinople, this is what you see of the famous ancient walls. But you can see, like right here and down at the bottom, that those are parts of the old wall, and the rest of that is all new tourist construction. But this is what it actually looked like in the late 1800s, early 1900s. This place was absolutely wrecked. And here's the deal is if someone is laying siege to the town, you don't have to go around and destroy miles and miles of walls. You just need to break through a few breach points and then you can get into the city. But it looks like pretty much all of the walls have been destroyed. The towers are cracked in half. And this place is really prone to big earthquakes. So it's kind of hard to tell if the tsunami did this or if it was a series of earthquakes. But also to the east of the city is the Anastasian Wall running from sea to sea. This was literally the best fortified city in the world. And nowadays there's only a handful of spots that the wall is still above ground. It's completely buried in a lot of areas. But I don't know, like I said, since it fell to the Arabs, it seems like a really easy out for them to just say, well, yeah, but we were there for 1,000 years. Some sources estimate that there were around 500 churches and monasteries between the 4th and 15th centuries. However, not all of these existed simultaneously, and some may have been lost to time or had a name change. But conversely, there are over 3,000 mosques built in that city, and these are a lot easier to identify today. And let's not forget that one of the main primary sources for this time period wrote in a dialect that had been extinct for 1,300 years or something. One of the other main primary sources is Procopius, which was all the way back at Justinian's time. So it's kind of funny how this city peaked in 500 AD with Justinian, then just managed to coast through history until 1453. So like I said, I don't know that I actually proved any points here, but I think you see how when you look into this, it's pretty suspect. Anyway, I hope it made a little bit of sense. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll catch you on the next one. Static out.